There you go. How's that? Good. Yeah, and you just want to make sure you turn it on. Otherwise you wouldn't. And I might join you over there if Mary Ann's not coming. We had another guest, Mary Ann Davis, and if she isn't here shortly, I'll jump in her seat. But I was just realizing, too, we're going to go through this process, this conversation about art and finding the strengths in art, and it's very kitchen table. It's as if we're all sitting around in a living room or at a restaurant, or we just ran into each other someplace, and we're going to go through some images and find the strong parts of the work, the strengths of the work. And through that process, everybody here has a different approach. Mary Lee Pappas, an art critic for many years. Use your mic on?
My mic is on.
Tell them where you've...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I was the art critic, weekly art critic with Nouveau News Weekly from 1999 to about 2007. After that, I was with the Indianapolis Star as a weekly visual arts columnist for 2 years. My background was as a museum professional and as a writer, journalist. So that's my background, art critique.
And Dan Grossman.
Yeah, my background is a little bit different. I've got a master's in public affairs. I work with Goodwill Industries. That's my day job. And writing as opposed to art is my occupation, and it has been since I've been small. But I do write a lot of art criticism for Nouveau. I probably more than most other freelancers with the publication. So I also venture into politics from time to time.
And I decided I would... Now, I did realize something after we sat here, that the screens are back here, and you guys are facing that way.
Right. Yoga comes in.
Well, it does,
Handy.
and or
Shoulder.
what we could do is if you wanted to move just a little bit, we could, or we could just... Here.
Tilt.
Yeah, that's fine. Whichever way you want to go. Well, I don't want you to be straining your back, your head, your neck, and there are two screens too. But either way, I decided I'll be the guinea pig on the first one to get us rolling. And there's one very important thing to take into consideration when we're looking at art, and that is its context and location. It's very much a part of the piece in itself, and it's also about scale. Scale is a huge component, and this particular case, this just happens to be, well, 4 stories tall, and I painted it upstairs on the stage, and then we hung it on the wall. And the way we had to approach this piece was site-specific. So if we were to take this painting and look at it elsewhere, hopefully what I wanted it to do was to function in just about any environment. Of course, it would have to fit that environment.
Monumental scale.
Monumental scale, yes. And to just be able to move and explode visually in the space. If you were to take this and put it someplace that it really didn't fit, then you wouldn't necessarily be able to look at that piece in its best light. And one of the things I like to always do as a rule of thumb is when I approach art, whether or not it's visual art, performing arts, literary arts, is I always look at art in its best light, to the point where I first want to see its positive influence on me, its strengths. And then what happens for me is the strengths, when I find those strengths, at that point, those can reveal the weaknesses. But if I approach it looking for the weaknesses, I kind of do myself a disservice. At least that's my approach. I also have to take into consideration that, there's this huge world art market, and we kind of put a lot of emphasis on how much the art is worth by how much someone paid for it. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily talking about the value of the art. And when a human being takes the time to extend their thoughts onto a surface or to a stage or to a score or a page, that in itself is worth honoring that art and looking at it in its best light. So what I was thinking we would do, and this is another idea here, is that you can see it in its context, in its place, but then if you were to see it out of context, every time I made this, I had to run up and down the catwalk, 2.5 floors? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And with a cast on my foot.
And that's called performance art.
Yes, it was called performance art. And up and down up to the catwalk, and then take my cell phone and shoot pictures of the piece, and then come back down and look at the cell phone and make the changes of what I just saw. So in that respect, if you were to see this piece out of context, it wouldn't have the same. It's that. But then we also have a painting here. This is a painting that is done by an artist, 87 years old. Her name is Lois Main Templeton. And, well, you guys jump in.
Oh, I love Lois.
Well, that's very good.
Yeah, that's very good. Well,
And that's another point.
but
And knowing the artist, it influences.
But in the manner in which I gauge and evaluate art, you look for the positive. Some people look immediately for what might be wrong with something. And, with a museum background, with a curatorial background, when I look at art to evaluate it, I walk into a situation with no bias whatsoever. You walk in with your mind fresh, with no expectation, no matter who the person is, no matter what it's going to be. You walk in with no expectation. And you gauge it against what the artist claims they are doing, and you gauge it based on the context and the space. And your piece that you've done for Clowes, that is above us, what I admire about the piece and what stands out immediately about that piece that we can all see, and we'll all be able to see it if we haven't seen it already, is that monumental scale, and to get the balance of color, of form, to get your eye to continue to move over that large of a space and at different levels is an achievement. It's a visual achievement. And that is what I see as a strength in that piece and the monumentality of it. If I were to see that piece 4 foot by 2 foot, I'd go, come on, Phil, I know that's, I know, look, come on, Phil. But to see it at that scale changes it completely.
Of course, if it were 4 foot by 2 foot, I would have done it differently.
Exactly, exactly. So that's just,
And
walking in with no
context
bias.
is so much part of when we're looking at art.
Yeah, absolutely. That fits in so well with this building. And when I think of the functionality of this building and the beauty of this Clowes Hall, and when I see that work there and how well it fits in, the architect who made this building, I even forget his name right now, because yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean his MO is to make a building that functions well in a space, like the Federal Building downtown, the one that a lot of people hate. But imagine if it was upended and it was like a skyscraper and it's 25 feet high overlooking the square. It wouldn't work. But he built it so it would fit in with a space, with the square,
The environment.
the
correct.
environment, right? So, and I think you did something similar here. You evaluated the space and you saw, what you could do with that space.
Yeah, I'd have to say that if I were looking at that one piece, and I'm not making this about me, as far as me making that painting, but I would have to say that when I did that, when I did say it in the documentary, I still couldn't believe that I pulled it off the way that I wanted it to come out. It did, in that I probably spent at least 100 visits from the stage, and before that, I don't know, 40 or 50 visits to that space up and down on all those levels so that I could find out how is this thing going to function. We have a palette considerations. You have a red and charcoal and blue carpet that's very rectilinear. And the entire building is extremely rectilinear. It's just straight, hard lines. And there are only 20 feet between the wall and where the painting is and the back wall. So most of it has to be viewed from all these different directions. And I had to figure out, okay, how is it going to play? It's very rectilinear. I need to introduce curvilinear lines and let them meander and wander. And while those lines still repeat what's going on in the space, they're a deviation from that, and they work with it. But then that's a huge scale.
But with the scale, the installation is great. The lighting is great. There are many things that could go wrong.
I had some help with that.
Yeah, many things that could go wrong. And Clowes has always been really visually responsible. Is that a funky phrasing? But yeah, there's always been good art in the lobbies. I don't know, is the Orlando Pele's piece? Yeah, the Orlando Pele's piece is so beautiful and melds with the building so well. And it's, I shouldn't say I have a favorite, but it is a favorite installation to see. When you go into a public space, it's happy, to see. So
This piece of Lois's, in context, it's called That Ho Choi Sky. And she saw a performance of Dance Kaleidoscope, and a great admirer of David Ho Choi of Dance Kaleidoscope. And that was her interpretation of making a landscape with elements dancing across the landscape as if it were a stage. And with that context, all of a sudden it takes on a much different visual. Whereas if you just walk past it, I suppose, I'm not up high enough, but this is also one of Lois Templeton's. And it's about 5 inches by 7 inches. And what's really remarkable in context is if you look at Lois's work, she has pieces that are huge, 6, 7 feet, and very, very small pieces, and each of them very much have the same energy. And I'm wondering why I can't get that to go up just a little bit. I think it's, I'll read what it says here. It says, "This is a place just for poets or anyone fumbling through life who picks up a piece of this and laying it next to that, steps back and says, well. And in context, that text, we can make sense of what's happening above it, or assign whatever we want to. That's how I see it. Correct? Correct. Yeah. This one has the same caption, and it's a much different shape. And what I love about that approach, one of the strengths of this is seeing this whole book. There are 30 pieces in this book, and they're all individual watercolor pieces. And about 6 of them have this same text, but they have a different image. And those are just thoughts conveyed paper. I think this is a very strong piece. I could see this at 12 feet. I could see it 6 feet tall and 12 feet wide, and it's this big. And I just think it's got a lot of components, a lot of elements that are really strong. Color, shape. shape application. You guys just jump in if you have any ideas, any questions, any thoughts. What do you have?
I was just reading the stanza over and over again, and it's kind of a nice little.
It's a wonderful thought. It's a wonderful sentence.
It's why anybody would make art. I mean, really.
I'll read it again. It says, "This is a place for poets or anyone who, fumbling through life, picks up a piece of this and, laying it next to that, steps back and says, well.
Because it's those weird juxtapositions that make great art.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's bringing different things together, and that maybe nobody thought of putting like a square and a rectangle together, like before a certain time, and put them together, and they made a different shape, and the person said, wow. Or a caveman, like, you know, he, in the caves of Lascaux, France, he like put some charcoal on a limestone, and suddenly, wow, you've got some kind of representation, and nobody had ever done that before. So I think that's what's going on in that stanza there to some degree. I mean, that's the human experience. That's
The human experience, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of Lois picking up stuff on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
Her home in Maine.
Yeah.
Going along the beach and picking up little shells and things that she had collected. And,
Right.
But also what I enjoy about Lois's work is that it is so spontaneous. It's so, abstract expressionist, but it's spontaneous, and it's with emotion, and it's feeling. And something with all visual art, sincerity shines through first and foremost before anything, no matter what you're painting. If you're doing a paint out, if you're drawing with crayons, it doesn't matter. Sincerity really shines through, and you really do see that in Lois's work and in these examples.
She's a highly educated woman, and it's remarkable how she breaks things down to their simplest form. It's about reduction, and she decided that when she was 50, she would be an artist. So she decided to start painting. She went to an art material store, and she saw all these cute things called kneaded erasers and vine charcoal, and she thought, oh, what a fun thing. And she decided, I want to try this, and so she did. And she gave it her all, and if she made it, great, and if she didn't, when I say make it, made it something part of her life. And if she didn't, oh well. And I think she knocks out some pretty nice stuff. This is one of hers also. It's a lot more structured. It's only 20 inches by 30 inches, and it is titled, which makes a big difference about the piece. I mean, me personally, what do you guys think of this first glance as far as formal elements?
Oh, formal elements? I was going to say I think it's pretty because it has purple in it,
Well,
and I like purple. So
that's one of the formal elements as far as palette.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if that whole thing were yellow, that purple would be fighting like cats and dogs.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, with
Make sure you use your
the
mic.
writing, with the writing, you're supposed to try to figure out what it means, but I don't know if there's any way to really do that completely. So you're forced to think of or see the writing as a piece of visual art rather than necessarily something you can understand
It's
as,
mark
say,
making.
a poem.
It's very much mark making. And there's enough information for there to be that opportunity to be inquisitive, to imagine, to interpret, and simultaneously it's titled Understood in Part.
And that makes lots of sense because we see the big graphic X's, we see shape and we see form that everyone's familiar with and that people are visually comfortable with. They're out of context, they're smashed on this canvas, and there's a visual element that's comfortable to every single person that would look at it. There's a familiarity with the X, there's a familiarity with the letters, whether we know what they are or not. More people, I think, would visually respond to this than the Ho Choi
Yeah.
dancing piece,
Yeah.
I would think.
And there's balance and there's symmetry. And the most wonderful part, still, when you break it down to its simplest forms, if you're finding one of the real strengths of this piece, is as a palette, it's really pretty. I mean, I think the gray and the purple and the black are just lovely.
People are very receptive to gray.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, gold dress, blue dress. They're very receptive to gray.
This piece by an artist by the name of Susan Hodgen. And without telling you about Susan, does anybody know this artist's work? Well, you do, but just you do. Without telling you about Susan, some strengths. Who sees some strengths here? Sure.
I like the faceting,
The faceting,
complexity.
yeah. The building, the way it's built on top of the structure,
I just like it that it's broken up into lots of parts.
lots of
the
parts in the
complexity.
structure. And what do you see, Dan? What's going on?
When I wrote about her work, I thought of like her eyes being like X-rays, and she could see into the substructure of like a mountain, or what's there to her.
Seeing through the parts.
Just the way she put the forms together was very, very exciting to me, and the way she deals with light and space. And I had never seen a work quite like hers before.
And there's something very comfortable in the complexity of it, but one of the reasons I think that is in finding a strength in that complexity with the comfort is that on most of her pieces, while they're growing up into kind of all these elements that seem to float in space, she always anchors all of that. It's anchored. There's a place for it to sit, and it's hanging on. And that, visually, as an element, is really comforting, and it's a strength in the composition and her statement.
And her art evolved over time. She didn't always paint like this. She painted a lot of flat surfaces before, and the circle was kind of a motif in her work, and she did a lot of abstract landscape paintings, but she went through this almost like a revolution in her art. She completely changed the way she did things, and it was by reading a philosophical essay about the difference between beauty and the sublime. Beauty is something that, well, it can be pretty. It can be, you think of Art Deco maybe, or pink dresses or something like that. But the sublime is something that may have beauty as an element, but it's something that may also kill you. So that was a essay by this English philosopher and on God, I can't remember any names now.
That's all right.
But that essay completely changed the way she thought and conceptualized her art and the way she did art. And
in this piece here, one thing I find just so remarkable, and we have this term as artists, that it's kind of our own little lingo between us and our own little circle, is that one of the biggest compliments that one artist might pay to another artist is when you look at that artist's work and not only do you think it, but you say, I hate you. Because you're just so jealous that I can't stand you that you did that. I wish I did that. And a lot of times I would look at Susan's work and I think, I hate you. And I hate her, and that's a compliment, very much so, in that we're both painters. And that means, oh, thank you.
The one commonality in her earlier work and her later work is that sense of balance. You know, this beautiful sense of balance and rhythm in how our eyes move over the piece.
With the lines, the way they dance, but then they turn
Yeah.
into shapes, and they
And her-
dance, and they change places. There's,
Yeah.
there's occupied space, and then it's not occupied, and you can see through it, and.
Yeah.
And her hand became lighter. Her hand became lighter. And it's just, the sense of light and space is just
And what's
so
really
much more
remarkable,
sophisticated.
too, is that recently Susan died, and to leave that wonderful body of work, when you think of it, if you didn't know that in context, that the artist was no longer living.
She kept up her work until she was no longer able to. She kept drawing and painting.
And when you come to the work, not knowing anything about the artist, well, from looking at it, you're objective, as opposed to if you already had the information about the individual, we can find ourselves being a little bit more sympathetic towards the artist. And my point of that is, again, a human being made it. And in that of itself is something of value, that somebody took the time to extend their thoughts to a surface.
And one thing when writing about Susan, these terms like abstract and representational, they were so inadequate for her work because her work is both. She is representing something.
Yeah.
But she has these abstract expressionist touches in her work too. But ultimately I chose to try to
Cubist.
avoid using,
Very
right,
Cubist.
absolutely. But trying to use those, not use those words and use something different to try to describe her work was important for me. When
This piece right here is one of Mary Ann Davis's. She was going to join us this evening. I hope she's okay. I haven't heard from her. But we'll just assume that everything's just fine. And she paints representationally, and she loves to do plein air painting. She loves to paint outdoors. This piece is a small piece. It's only 12 inches by 9 inches. And I think she handles the space really well. I think there's just this wonderful sensitivity and lusciousness about the paint. Of course, you could do that with paint. You know, you can slather it on like frosting, which makes it wonderful. But she also does pastels, representational work. She likes to paint in an impressionist style. And there's a lot of personality right there. That girl is, she's not sitting there, she's doing something. She's quiet and she's contemplating, and it's very obvious in the way that the artist depicted that expression, that you got to kind of get close to that face and see, or look close to that face and see that that person is actually participating in an activity, reading or thinking, and it shows. And I think that's a strength in that piece, that you can see that personality of that mood, that individual. Now, jump in.
Really? Did anyone see the Calder exhibit when it was at the Children's Museum? Wasn't it wonderful? That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think of all of the remarkable little moving kinetic works, you know, and
And that's the wonderful thing I think about. What the option that we have when we're looking at art and finding the strengths in art is that looking at the individual piece, but it's almost impossible to do it only without comparison, without in context to something else. Because like you said, you see this piece and you think of all this history that came with it, your history that you're bringing to it. And it's a remarkable piece. And if we were looking at it in a photograph, all we would be seeing is this wonderful composition that just happens to be relative to where the photographer was standing at the time. Because if we're underneath this piece or across from it, it's moving around us all the time, which has a completely different effect, And we know that. But when we approach sculpture that is moving, it has a completely different effect than sculpture that's still. Would you agree?
Agreed. And context.
In
It's all
context.
context.
See,
What's
it's
the
in
environment?
context. What's
This
the
is
environment? Yeah.
installation. Does it work so that you can actually view it? Is it suffocating you because there's not enough space? Are the walls contrasting enough so that you can see it? And I mean it for this piece. I mean it for any kind of kinetic or installation piece.
Frank Stella,
yeah.
that the things don't move at all. They can possibly, unless they bring in big cranes, because of these massive pieces of steel that are this thick, that are 10 and 12, 14, 15 feet tall by 20 feet long, that are either laying next to each other or on top, barely on top of each other, and to walk through them, it can feel crushing. I mean, like you were just so insignificant. But they're sculpture, and they're in the space.
And George Rickey, yes?
Yeah.
Famous kinetic. Isn't his piece outside of the IMA? Yeah. And they are, not just these beautiful forms moving in space. They're kind of engineering feats as well. And again, it artwork that can capture the imagination of the most people, whether they have a scientific brain or a fairy tale brain, always works like a piece like this.
And that's a really good point, because with that, everybody's bringing something different to the art. Everybody brings themselves and what they know in their background to it. And Dan, this piece here at the IMA, you
I
remember
missed
seeing it,
this
didn't
one
you?
in the Ephraimson Pavilion. I missed it.
When did this one come in?
This was a couple years ago in the Ephraimson Pavilion at the IMA. And did anybody here see it? You saw it? You get to see everything. You get around. You saw it.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Well, it's remarkable how it interacts with the environment. I mean,
Yeah, in the
outside.
context, it's fantastic. In context, it is remarkable. And the fact that when you're coming down the escalator and you're seeing something that is very different than when you're coming up the escalator or walking underneath it. And if you're walking with your back to the windows, it has a completely different feeling, as if it's floating in front of the windows. Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful piece.
Who is this one by? Do you remember?
Well, I wrote it
I
down.
missed this one. Oh my God, whatever.
I wrote it down. I'm really bad at that. It's that in cars and
What I love about the installations that are in the Ephraimson Pavilion at the IMA is that the IMA gives up-and-coming American artists the opportunity to do an installation, to try their hand at an installation in that space. And so what you see is a really great challenge. It's rising to the challenge. It's rising to the occasion to make that fantasy of what you're thinking come to life. And it doesn't always work.
yeah.
I witnessed one that didn't quite work and had to be altered. And even when it was installed, and I won't say who it was or what it was, but because no one else would know. I mean, everyone enjoyed it, appreciated it, but it just didn't quite work. But I love that they give artists the opportunity to come in and to make something of that really fantastic space. It's a great welcome.
Did you see the bamboo jungle piece?
Yes.
Did you see the bamboo jungle piece? I know you saw.
She saw everything.
Finding the strengths in that piece, for me, one of the strengths was the attempt.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a real strength in the attempt. And it was quite obvious to me that when I was in there, it was because of the confines of the space and very much limited to what one could use within that space if people were going to walk inside it. Because in a bamboo forest, it's not one layer. It's not one layer. It is many layers. And that was the element that was missing. But while I was there, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I know that, so rather than completely dismissing it because it doesn't meet that same effect, what are the strengths in this? And it really was the attempt for me.
When something is created with sincerity, it's easy to see the good qualities.
Yeah, very much so. It was full of sincerity in that there was an awful lot of thought put into it, and I think on those, and then this piece right here, compared to that really lovely light and flowing piece that we just saw outdoors at the University of Minnesota, again in context, it's a massive piece. So what would be so? What's the strength of this thing other than its sheer mass?
Dan?
Well, it looks like a jungle gym. I mean,
It does look like you could jump on it and rock it, couldn't it?
It's the balance.
It's the balance, exactly. Yeah. Yep, that's one definite thing of the balance. And it makes you want to just jump on it and move it up and down. And in doing so, you probably would get crushed. But it makes you want to do that because it's so comfortable in the space. I think that is one of its real strengths, is to take something that remarkable, that massive, and just drop it on a lawn. To me, it's quite daring, and it's very effective. Mm-hmm.
A grand juxtaposition. How's that for art critic? But it's soft. I mean, it looks.
is
I mean,
soft.
it's so huge it could crush something, but it just has a really soft feeling.
Yeah.
But
Isn't
it's
that
just a
remarkable?
nice. Yeah, it's just a nice counterbalance. Counterbalance.
It is, yeah. It's hard as steel. It weighs a ton, and you want to jump on it, and it looks playful and soft.
Do you know if that was created specifically for that site?
I believe so.
Okay, because I'm noticing the curve of the piece echoes the curves, the arches, windows and doors of the building on the lower level.
Oh, well, look at you finding those relationships.
See, I'm learning from you.
You know, those are things that we look for all the time, the relationships with surroundings or within the piece itself. The lady here has a microphone, and I think it's because she wants to make sure that she captures the comments. This is a fun sculpture, and I didn't put any information with it on purpose, just to illustrate the point that we don't know how big it is. Well, you don't. How big it is. We don't know its scale. We don't know its context as far as its environment. We have a few things we know, that those elements there, those vertical elements, are representing people, human beings. It's a crowd. It's full of color. And they're relating to each other. Some climbing on top of each other. And
well, notice that you use verbs to describe what they're doing. It has a sense of movement, but it's completely still.
Yeah.
So that's a great contradiction.
it
that you
is.
see.
It's a wonderful contradiction. Creates a lot of energy, creates a lot of strength. I think it's exhilarating. But it's also, as a palette, I think the palette's wonderful with that dominant pink and orange up against that blue is, it's just kind of thrilling. Mhm. Am I seeing so much into it that, it's like so people thinking to themselves,
Do you know what it's made of?
well, if I were to look really closely, it's something that is, I would guess, kind of, what about paper mache? Possibly. Could be tin, but I don't think so.
If there was some kind of rock like that, everybody would want it, I think.
Uh-huh.
Some kind of tourmaline.
Yeah.
It's tourmaline.
Tourmaline, uh-huh. But it's a really wonderful, interesting piece, and I'm guessing that it's not much bigger than this. Mostly because the slab that's on the bottom appears to be a stone. It's just my guess. Mhm. Does anybody have any thoughts on that one?
That it reminds me of a Giacometti if you got it.
Very much so, doesn't it, in context? Yeah. In relationship to another artist?
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Are you gonna tell us? Do you have information?
Well, I would, but what's really fun is I don't know. Because when I was flipping through, for a while now I've been trying to research it. Yeah, and then when I was flipping through images that I have in my to-do files, which are gigs, I think I'm on my 4th terabyte of hard drive backup now of images, which is a lot. This guy here,
We do know who this one is by.
you guys know who this is. You know who this is. No, actually, it's Franz Klein. And one of my favorite artists.
Good guess.
Yeah, one of my favorite artists. Tower Bridge is the name of this, and this is when he was in New York City, and he grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and when he moved to New York City in the abstract expressionist period as a young man, he just broke out from his original pieces his earlier pieces representing Scranton that were representational. And this is a big piece. And Tower Bridge very much could be a bridge in New York. But what's remarkable about this, and it looks like it's a mess, but it's action painting and it's abstract expressionism. And this is the same era as Pollock, where the paint was applied very physically. And when he makes his brush strokes, it almost looks like he's coming from outside the canvas, going into the canvas and outside the canvas, as opposed to working just inside. It's a very physical thing going on. And there are different grays and blacks. And then the white is used as an editing for addition by subtraction. And it's a very powerful piece. And it might not be one that most of us are fond of.
I'm fond of it.
Are you fond of it? I'm
Can
gonna
you
see
hear
if I
me?
get
I'm
this to
fond of it.
go.
I'm very fond of it.
I'm not sure that's going to happen.
I like the spontaneity, and I like the high contrast a lot. It's visually what appeals to me personally, as opposed to being, an arts professional. I like it. And I like that huge sense of movement, that physical movement that you can feel in a piece like that. Just like it. I like black, I like white.
what could that possibly have to do with art? Everything, right? Any ideas?
Andy Warhol?
Yeah, yeah. But, you know, Andy was, you studied Andy?
Sure.
A little bit.
He was a graphic designer. He was in advertising. He was living in New York the same time as Franz Klein, who was the one just before this, with the big boys in abstract expressionism. Helen Frankenthaler was part of that whole group. In fact, she could hang with the boys. She could do shots of whiskey and cigars and play poker with them. She was invited into their group. Andy wasn't allowed in their group. They didn't take him as a serious artist because he was in advertising and he was a commercial artist. So he would lug his paintings around to ice cream parlors and to beauty salons or wherever place he could put his paintings. And he tried to fit in, and he couldn't fit in. And so he kind of created his own cult, his own little world, and painted relative to what was interesting but was also shocking. He painted every one of the soup cans from Campbell's. They were about 20 inches by 16 inches, 16 by 20. And he sent all of them to the art dealer in California, I think by the name of Bloom. And each one of them was placed side by side in the exhibit. And then there were shelves with real cans of soup along the way. And the exhibit was not received well at all. He didn't go to his own opening reception. And the public just didn't really grasp that. And when it was written about, it brought notoriety to his work because it wasn't received very well. So here's this guy, Warhol, hanging out there from New York with these soup cans thing. And Marilyn Monroe died very recently from the show, after the show, and he did his portrait of Marilyn with the four. And it was that shot these pieces into more acclaim. So in context, in art history, these pieces were going for $100 a piece. And 4 or 5 of them were sold at the gallery when he had his opening on these pieces. And the dealer decided that he wanted it to stay as a set. So he went and bought the pieces back from the people who purchased them. And he kept them for himself. But wouldn't that have been wonderful if you could have picked up one of those soup cans for $100? And what I'm getting at with this whole thing is that in context, now we're looking at that art relative to its value in the market, or are we still being critical and open-minded about the piece itself? Could mean a lot of things. We were talking earlier. It could represent how comfortable we are with the accessibility of food. We just expect it to be there. Open the cabinet door, and there's our food. I mean, we didn't have to do anything for it except go pick it up at the grocery store. And it could be about food distribution, the complexity of food distribution, which is just a remarkable industry and complex. Mm-hmm. Or it could just be that some guy was a little bit upset with the folks that wouldn't let him into their club, and he decided that he was just going to paint something avant-garde and mundane. Mm-hmm.
I like, did you see the IMA Warhol exhibit? And it was so wonderful to see all of those illustrative works for the Christmas cards, the illustrations. They were all so beautiful and, just very graphic and more graphic.
And it was indicative, too, when you have the art history on this, that simultaneously or just after the soup cans, that's when he decided to do his money, that's when he was doing his money series, the dollar bill. So each of these items that are very mundane, daily things that he turned into works of art.
I think what's interesting about him is, I mean, he's an artist who's completely comfortable with selling his work, and maybe before that time, artists, were not as comfortable as that. And, by putting a dollar bill up on a canvas or making a print of one. And it's just showing how, well, yeah, artists need to eat too. Soup, maybe.
Well, a lot of artists, I mean, that's where they do make their money, is in packaging.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable when you think about some of the packaging you see and what went into that.
Correct, packaging,
They just
correct.
went the next step.
I'm saying it again loudly only because for its benefit that a lot of artists did make money in things like packaging, whereas for me, I made my living in food and beverage. But from that, I've done many series that were food items. And I think we all bring something different to what we do from our previous life into our current life. I was trying to get to the internet only because on each one of these, and it isn't going, but I think that's only because we didn't set it up in advance. What I was doing with these here was after each artist going to their page to see more examples of their work. And I can try it. But we don't need to. It's not necessary. Like, for example, this one here. Yeah, but I'm not hooked up to the internet here. So let's have some ideas about, I'm going to try and do that. But I don't want our conversation to be contingent on whether or not I can get there. You guys talk a little bit more about what you've done in your experiences as far as, I know you go every week. Every single week you go.
Dan is still out there every week,
Yeah.
taking in everything local.
And one thing I have noticed that Dan does quite well for the viewer is he describes what's there in the show. He describes what you're going to see and what's in front of you. And sometimes, if there's not enough information, like for example, you had a review of a show that was downtown at Indy Colony.
Indy, yeah.
Yeah.
Indy.
And there were several artists in there. And one artist in particular had ripped out some images from magazines, whatever, small personal body parts, and taped them to the wall. And the idea of the show was that it was curated by themselves and not from an outside influence. And in this particular case, since that individual did not have an artist statement, since the individual did not have an explanation on the wall for someone to be able to understand in context why those pieces are just stuck to the wall, well, it was basically the artist's fault for not supplying that for the audience. needed to. Some things have to have an explanation, even if it's a couple of words. And well-written, it could be really effective, lead you in all kinds of paths. But what I thought was remarkable in that particular case was while you commented on those specifically, your description of what was on the wall, the names of those different body parts, obviously was not, you said it wasn't.
I actually, honestly, I forget what I wrote.
What was fun, what was fun was instead of bashing it, what you did choose to do was find
Which
an
I may
artist.
have done.
Well, yeah. But instead of bashing the show, bashing that art, he chose to pick an artist in the show that did supply context, that had really strong work, and you focused on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Which was wonderful for the viewer, because instead of it being about what was lacking, you focused on.
But sometimes it's almost perverse sometimes as writing about art, because sometimes something will inspire you, even though it might not be to your liking, even though it might not have all the technical facility there or whatever, it might inspire you to like have this thought and use that, a turn of phrase or something. As a writer, that's really, addictive to get into that kind of thinking. And of course, you don't want to go off on a tangent with that, because then you forget the art. You're only writing and, for your own pleasure or whatever. So you don't want to go too far out on a tangent. And saying that you want to do justice to the show, like India is one of these places that will have, maybe 15 artists exhibiting. There might be some fantastic work there, and there might be just some stuff that just, it's not there yet, and that's okay. But as an art critic, if you're only focusing on the stuff that's not there yet, you're not doing your job. You should be talking about what's really accomplished. You should be talking what excites you in a positive way. Because right now in Indianapolis, things are exploding. There's just an amazing amount of art there and so much talent.
I disagree.
Well, how do you disagree? I'd like to hear this.
I do. I found that over the years there was less and less to write about. There was less and less to write about. There were fewer venues. Fewer venues in 2006 than there were in 2000. Fewer, and when I say venues, I mean everything from coffee shop shows to notable shows at bigger venues. The work was not there in the diversity that it was in 2000. I found that things were shrinking, and maybe not the quality, but the number of exhibits, the number of galleries. I just saw galleries closing one right after
That's
the
true.
other.
Well, and it
From
also
Hot
had-
House Gallery
yeah.
to Woodburn and Westcott, which were notable spaces, to iBlink, which was a
Yeah.
phenomenal space in Fountain Square. All of
In
these,
2007 and 2008, it had a lot to do too with the crash. industry,
it's
the
the
economy.
Indianapolis. It's also Indianapolis's culture.
Yeah.
But so many quality venues featuring quality artists and quality works
Now,
fell flat.
Would you say, if you were talking 2000 more, 2006, 7 less, that now, 7 years beyond that it's
No.
increased, graduated from the 7?
No, I think what we've got is quality. I think we have more quality at the Harrison Center for the Arts. I think we're seeing stability at the Indie Artist Colony. I think we're seeing stability at the places that are still there. Hoosier Salon.
Well, I'll tell you
Still
one thing
there.
that's been going strong since, I guess, a good 12 and a half to 13 years is Art at Clowes.
Yeah, Art at Clowes is great, and I love the diversity. I know I'm not just because I'm at Clowes,
Right.
but I've enjoyed the work that's been
Yeah.
chosen a lot.
It is remarkable when the performing arts go all out to support the visual arts, which is so rare. And usually they're so separated in that works of art in a public venue for the performing arts are usually items that are, permanent pieces for the lobby. They're for appreciation as art, but basically they are permanent installations. And to have rotating shows constantly where all these people, like 180, 190,000 people in a year go through and see all this different art is really remarkable.
It is. It is. And that's when I joined Nouveau in 1999, the coffee shops weren't being visited. The restaurants weren't being visited. The eclectic venues were really not being visited. Artists who were exhibiting their works in those venues really weren't getting written about. And those venues are spectacular places to have your art seen and experienced by people. They're just the best. Coffee shops are the best venues.
Restaurant.
So many people get to see your work, interact with your work. They remember your name, and it's just great. I mean, Indianapolis, where we really are, okay, we're a city, but we're still kind of a small town. And it's a nice way to interact with your community. It's a great way to share, art with the community so much.
A month ago, I got a call from the maitre d'. Actually, I got the call from Paula Katz, who was the executive director. We're friends. We've worked together on enough projects.
I'm
that
so
I
excited
trust
about
her.
her new role.
Yeah, and I
excited.
trust whenever Paula picks up the phone, and if she calls me and she says, I have something for you to do, I say, okay. And then I find out what it is later. We just have that relationship where I trust her. We've worked on enough projects that she would never introduce me to something that was not to my advantage or anything else. And in this particular case, she called and she said, I have this place for you to show. And she said, you're probably going to need, 7 or 8, maybe 10 pieces. You want to go look at it with me and we'll see what to pick? And I said, sure. I mean, I told her, sure, we'll do that. And it's Cerulean Restaurant downtown.
That's right, yeah.
And what was wonderful about it is the reason that she picked me, because she knows me quite well, she had several people that she was looking at, and the maitre d' as well. And she said, he's not at all, he won't have any problem showing in a restaurant environment. In other words, what she was saying is the ego wasn't there. And it was true, because to me, I've been in the food and beverage business, and Cerulean is a wonderful restaurant. And to be able to pick the pieces, site-specific, and put them in that fishbowl on that busy corner and have 6 months and get 100% of the sale price with 0 commission and all of the writing and whatever comes along with it, I thought, how can you lose? But I do know one thing that you're saying about, one thing that happened to the galleries is the internet. And instead of having to rely on a brick and mortar place to show your work and be at their mercy, people have the world has changed in that I can have a complete gallery and it can be right online and I can show my work all over the world. And that has really changed the art industry.
It was also, some of the galleries were just singing to the choir.
Yeah.
It would be the same artist, the same.
They were showing what they knew would sell.
Right.
Because that's how they stayed open.
Right.
And you can't blame them.
No, but it would be singing to the choir. You reached the people that were going to buy the work at that point in time. You reached the people who already had it in their budget to buy that much art that time.
I think
somewhat.
what the internet has done, it's allowed artists to live here in Indy and sell their work elsewhere.
Yeah. Exactly.
Provided they have like a little bit of savvy, a little bit of business sense. I've met a number of artists who are living here and making it as artists, like, for example, Loban Hamilton.
Yes.
With his incredible work. If you've ever seen this guy, he makes these painting. Well, you can't call them paintings; they're really like sculptures almost.
They're sculpted paintings, painted
yeah,
sculptures
exactly.
of vinyl, and they're made with broken records.
Exactly. and that's just amazing to see that. And it's helped. The internet's just helped him. It's helped a lot of.
He
different
put a
artists
piece
here.
in a gallery in Chicago, and it just so happened that one of the producers from a show on Fox, that's a current show called Empire, was in Chicago, and when he saw the piece in the gallery, he was so impressed with it that he thought, oh wow, that would be wonderful in the set. And he put his work on the set of this show, Empire, and most of the notoriety came from all of the publicity that his piece was in the show, through social media and through interviews and through the press from that his piece was in the show, where, that was a real break.
And I admit, I follow him on Facebook.
Yeah.
And he's very dynamic on Facebook. He does good social media stuff.
Is one of his that's making the records?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, that's right. There is one there.
that's where Cerulean is, right at the Alexander, and that's where IMOCA is. That's how Paula Katz got involved with it. So you never know how way leads on to way, which, by the way, is one of my favorite poems, part of one of my favorite poems by Robert Frost, where it says those two roads that diverged in the yellow wood and could not travel both. But that wonderful part in there where it says, and knowing how way leads on to way. Well, I don't necessarily know where I'm going, but I do know that if I take this path, it's going to go somewhere because it always has. Yeah. So, does anybody have any questions? I think we're, yes, dear.
Dan, you had mentioned that you're excited about up-and-coming artists and that there's a great pool of talent here that you see happening. I would love to hear more of what you have to, your comments on that.
Oh, sure. Well, Loban Hamilton's only one, but I can, if I had a better memory, I could list all the artists that I am excited about. Let's see. Well, Phil Campbell, we were just talking about. Paula Katz and how she just became the director of IMOCA. I mean, Philip Campbell has an amazing work right now in IMOCA. It's called Your Catfish Friend, and it's this basically takes up the space of a wall, and it shows a catfish, and it shows
It's a bas-relief
boat.
carving that's 20 feet by 10 feet, and it's chiseled out of
mahogany.
mahogany, and then pigment applied to the mahogany, and it's quite a remarkable piece.
And current shows right now, Jonathan McAfee has some great work, very pop art inspired work at Gallery 924, and his recent work is using American Apparel ads as his subject, but what he does to transform these images into paintings is quite remarkable, and he's really great with mixed media and using spray paint and acrylic and oil and Sharpie to come up with these great images that I think maybe Andy Warhol, if he was alive, if he
would
were
say,
alive,
"I hate you."
Yeah, exactly. but what was really cool is that he took these weird backgrounds, like checkerboard backgrounds and whatnot, that kind of look like, the disco floor in Saturday Night Fever. If you took that and upended it, and you put some guy in this weird shirt, everything clashes in these paintings, but somehow it all works out together. Yeah. And it was funny because I was having a discussion with an art instructor, and she was maybe looking, at the beginning of the discussion, you were saying, are you looking for the good stuff, or are you looking for the stuff that doesn't do it for you? Are you looking to critique the worst aspect of it rather than what inspires you? And I think maybe she was going off in the latter direction. She was kind of saying, well, one of the eyes is too big and one of the eyes is too small, and the value of the neck is kind of, it should be toned down because then you would see the whole face. And I think, I'm not going there with what I'm writing. And I'm really excited by this work. And sometimes it's okay if, Edward Hopper might not have been the best painter in the world, and as far as being able to represent the human form, but really doesn't matter when you see one of his paintings. I mean, sometimes it's okay that the artist isn't Michelangelo, but it's the vision is more than that. It's more than just the technical facility. What is the artist saying to you? That's what's really important to me. What inspires me? That's.
And that's a really good point. One of the things to look forward to in art in all forms is whether it's performing art, music, written art, visual art. There are usually cues and clues. In visual art, there are visual cues and visual clues as to, like you mentioned, the eyes a little bit off, the neck painted a different value, this would have done. By looking through the painting, the art, listening to the score, the rest of it, you can see where the artist had left visual cues that this was my intention, or clues. Cues in that I meant this to then relate to that, because you look at this and then to that. And then the clues is that it was intentional, that there's evidence that by looking at it. So by looking for those cues and those clues, often we can see more in the piece than just the technical aspects.
You want the illusion to work.
Yeah, illusion.
But
Yeah, the smoke in the mirror, sure.
well, what's remarkable about some artists is they're pushing themselves, and what McAfee does in his work. I mean, to a certain extent, he has that technique, but to a certain extent, he's pushing himself beyond technique, and he's looking for accidents to happen sometimes, good accidents that transform his work into to a place where he's never been before, and he's consciously searching out those moments in his work.
Okay, I have one more question. And I completely agree with you as far as how the market changed around 2006, 2008. And I am on a current mission now to fall in love with the city culturally. And I'm wondering, you had mentioned Harrison and Gallery 924. Where do you go, since you're actively working the beat? Where do you go to find the fresh content where it's not insular and like these people are thinking outside of the box?
Well, what's going on in Fountain Square is a good place to start. I mean, I think there was kind of a deadness there around the time, 2007, 2008.
I was there at the Murphy Building at the time.
Yeah.
In fact, Lois and I shared a studio in 2007 and 2008 there. And we left there, that's when Phil Campbell had the building. And we left there and went to the Stutz, because I had a studio also at the Stutz. And Amy Kennedy, who was at the Stutz, I was sharing with her, and Lois at the Murphy. And the Murphy got a little seedy, especially for an 82-year-old woman being there. And so what we did was move over to the Stutz. And while the Stutz has a wonderful history, for me it was far too structured. It was very much, it was different than what I wanted. You've been to my studio.
Huge.
And I go and I close the door and I get my work done. I don't want to belong to committees. I don't want to belong to clubs. I don't want to have to do all of these things, and I just want to go and get my work done. And I've got 15 or 20 different things going. And Fountain Square, since then, because of its revitalization, has brought in more venues for showing. I don't know if they're coming back with the artist colony capacity that they had when the Murphy Building was.
It's a tough balance because
It is, because now space is too expensive.
Right, because you get all these people in,
My
and then
studio
these
was
developers
$300 a
come in
month.
and get all these wonderful restaurants, and then
Yeah.
that drives the rents
Right.
up and the artists out, and
My
kind of-
studio was
yeah.
$300 a month, and at the Stutz it was $700 a month, and they were the same size.
And we kind of would have, when I was writing, we would kind of have a joke. Are you an artist because you can afford the studio space? can you call yourself an artist because you can afford the studio space? Or, it didn't matter if you could paint or not. And that's one of those levels of critique that you were looking at. Just to kind of give my 2 cents, I always applaud the Harrison Center for the Arts because they do such a great job of communicating about their art to the broader community. They, I think, make grand efforts to bring everyone from every level in to interact and experience art in a very sincere way. And they do just such a great job of communicating about the artists they have there and about the exhibits they have there to the community. Now, do I like all the exhibits? Are they exhibits that entertain my interest? No. Are they exhibits that I would give 5 stars to if I were still writing Critiques Weekly? Probably not, but I have to applaud their engagement with the community.
And if you want to see some really remarkable art when you're at the Harrison Center, because I know we got to wrap this up, I'm going to squeeze this in right now. In that same building on the south side where the 15th Street is, on the first floor of the Harrison Center, is this incredible organization called VSA. And I'm going to tell you what, if you want to see some of the most genuine, raw talent, abstraction in some art, VSA is the organization. We use art to teach individuals with disabilities. And I'm going to tell you, some of the work that comes out of that in our new gallery space is just
It's 5-star all the time.
Oh, I mean, it's remarkable stuff, yeah. So.
That's what it's all about.
Well, thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun. Yeah. We'll have to get together.